Hi, my dear students. Today we are going to discuss about migration in birds. As you all know that the word migration comes from the Latin word migrare, which means to travel. It can be defined as a periodic movement of birds from one place to another. For what? For what purpose? To obtain the advantages of the favorable conditions. Generally, those birds are named as migratory birds. But some birds do not migrate. They are known as native birds. They remain in the same place throughout the year. Whereas these bird migration ways are two types. Onward journey means from the home to the new place. Backward journey from new places to the home. So this movement occurs during the particular period of a year, and the birds usually follow the same route. According to ornithologists, there are mainly 6 types of bird migrations. Those are latitudinal migration, longitudinal migration, altitudinal migration, partial migrations, irregular migrations, and seasonal migration. Now I try to explain you each and everything. What is latitudinal migration? In this type of migration, birds move from north to south and south to north. Generally, these are mostly migrated for the purpose of feeding and nesting. So birds move to south during the period. During this period for mostly shelter too. In summer, these birds move over to temperate and subarctic regions of northern hemispheres. In winter, these land masses are very covered with snow, so they migrated to the what you call optimum areas, favorable areas. For this latitudinal migration, American golden plover is an example. It enjoying 2 summers in a year without experiencing any winter. Similarly, Siberian birds, they travel from Siberia to India and Sri Lanka. Nearly they travel about 6,000 miles. And for the latitudinal migration, some tropical birds also example. Then come to longitudinal migration. Longitudinal means in this type of migration, birds migrate from east to west or west to east. Generally, in southern hemisphere, we can observe this type of birds. And the Patagonian flower is the most example for this, which visits Falkland Island and South Patagonian in September and October for breeding. Falkland Island is famous for this Patagonian flower. And third type of bird migration is altitudinal migration. Means it is also known as vertical migration. Most of the birds that shows this type of migration are present in mountains, because the movement of birds to high mountains in the summer and to low valleys in the winter. So in India, a number of species during summer migrate from plains to slopes of Himalayas, ascending thousands of feet above the sea level and return to places on the commencement of winter. For this, some common woodrock and bushchat and scolopax rusticola, all these birds are example. Next, partial migrations. In such cases, what happened, all the birds of a group of migratory birds, they don't leave a native land. Some of birds may undergo migration and some remain in the same native place. So this type of migration is called a partial migration. Generally, bluebirds, blue jays of Canada, North United States are example for this partial migrants. And fifth one, I think, it is irregular migration. In this type of migration, birds migrate after breeding. The adults and young disperse in all different directions for a few hundred miles in search of food and to avoid enemies. For example, blue herons, cuckoos, thrushes, warblers. These are examples for irregular migrations. And sixth one, according to ornithologists, seasonal migration. Some ornithologists of temperate countries classified migrate birds according to the season: summer visitors, winter visitors, and birds of passage. Summer visitors in Britain, swifts, swallows, nightingales, and cuckoos are summer visitors because they arrive in spring from the south and remain to breed and leave for the south in autumn. Winter visitors: some birds such as fieldfare, snow bunting, and redwig are winter visitors as they arrive in autumn chiefly from north, stay throughout the winter, and fly northwards again in spring. And third type of seasonal migration is birds of passage. Some birds stay temporarily in some places on their way of migration. These birds are called birds of passage. Snipes and sandpipers may be example for birds of passage. Besides these kinds of avian migration, there are three more types of migrations in birds. Those are climatic migration, elemental migration, and gametic migration. In climatic migration, the migration that occur as a result of daily or seasonal changes in the climate of the environment, and they are called climatic migrations, and the birds are climatic migrants. The well-known north-south migrations of many ducks and geese is a good example for this climatic migration. Elemental migration: mostly birds migrate because of elemental needs, means food or water, so shelter also. This type of migration is known as elemental migration. It may occur at any time in a year, and most of the birds exhibit this type of elemental migrations. Next one is a gametic migration. The migrations that occur as a result of a need to occupy some special region to carry out reproduction are called gametic migrations. For this, you can say, for example, painted storks and pelicans from Siberia to India and Sri Lanka. And there are some modes of migrations. The modes of migrations are: first one, time of migratory bird flights, range of migration, altitude of flight, velocity during migration, routes of migration, and these are some modes generally used by birds. Time of migratory flights: birds may migrate during day or night. Accordingly, they are divided into diurnal migrants and nocturnal migrants. Diurnal migrants: some birds fly mainly by day and take rest during night time. These birds travel in flocks. Example for this: pelicans, cranes, hawks, robins, loons, etc. Come to nocturnal migrants. Generally, to avoid enemies and also to avoid heat, this type of birds like sparrows, warblers travel in night and take rest in the day, and they are called nocturnal migrants. They reach some places by day break and take rest and continue the journey again in the night. And come to range of migrations. How far they migrate? It varies from one or few miles to thousands of miles in different groups of migratory birds, but it is almost constant for a particular group. For example, Himalayan patrids cover a distance about 1 to 2 miles, and some swallows cover nearly 6,000 to 9,000 miles from the Arctic to the grassy plains of Argentina. And Arctic tern, which is a longest migrant bird, Arctic tern that migrates about 11,000 miles from the coast of Labrador to Antarctica. Next one is altitude of flight. At which height generally the birds shows flight during migration. Some birds fly quite close to the earth, while most routine migration occurs within 3,000 feet of the earth. Certain small birds have been reported to fly about 5,000 to 14,000 feet altitudes. Further, certain avian species even cross the Andes and Himalayas, mountain Andes and Himalayas at altitude of 20,000 feet and more. This is the altitude of flight. Velocity during migration, the speed of flight of migratory birds, that is vary from individual to individual and species to species. Cranes, carrions, crows and finches flight with the speed of 30 miles per hour. Maximum speed recorded of some Indian swift bird 176 miles per hour. Fastest flying bird is swift. Its speed is 176 miles per hour. Birds usually travel 5 to 6 hours a day, take rest for food and then continue the flight. Routes of migration: coastal routes, river valley routes, mountain ranges. All these are some landmarks for their routes of migration. Coastal routes, first of all, we are going to discuss. Migratory birds usually follow a definite route of flight. Generally, this route is common for going and returning. Marine birds follow sea routes. Land birds are known to cross as much as 400 miles of ocean in a stroke. Large number of migrants follow coastal routes, a certain important avian migratory. Coastal routes are the East Atlantic coastline, West Atlantic coastline, East Pacific coastline, West Pacific coastline, East Indies coastline. All these are coastal routes. Most of the birds prefer these coastal lines. And river valley routes. Some birds, while migrating from plains to hills, from hills to plains, vice versa, migratory birds cross rivers and river valleys, fall in the way. Mountain ranges sometimes. Very rarely the birds cross mountain ranges. Those high altitude birds, they can cross Andes and Himalayas too. The river valleys which enable the birds to recognize and remember the routes and entrances to the countries. This is all about ranges of migration, modes of migrations. Next one, order of migration. The birds follow a definite order during migration. Generally, adult or old ones start first and the young follow them. This urge of migration seems to be dependent on the maturity of gonads. In the return journey, young birds starts and the adult birds follow them. In the migratory order, the adult males will be at the forefront of the group. Next comes the females, then young ones, and the wounded birds at the end of the flock. Is there any problem during migration? Yes, there are so many problems during migration. The problems of migrations are, first one is the problem of wayfinding or navigation. This is an interesting aspect for many ornithologists, how the birds are able to find the way. Many explanations are there. During migration, birds try to set some landmarks. They can use their old experience. Sometimes they may use Earth's magnetic field, and sometimes by observing celestial bodies, moon, stars, they can recognize their pathway during migration. Sometimes homing instinct. These are useful during navigation or wayfinding. This is one of the most problem during migration. And what are the causes for avian migration? There are so many types of stimulus: environmental stimulus, gonadal stimulus, anterior part of the pituitary hormones, pituitary gland and its anterior pituitary hormones, sometimes thyroid hormones, and some metabolic changes that happen in the body. All these are stimulus or causes for avian migrations. Is there any disadvantages to this migration? Yes, there are some disadvantages of avian migration, along with advantages also. First, we are going to discuss about disadvantages. Migration is expensive in terms of food, energy and requirements. It is dangerous in terms of risk of predation and exposure to climatic factors. Every year millions of birds die during migration. And sometimes cold weather, snowstorms, hurricanes, strong current of wind, fog, man-made lighthouses, big buildings, television towers are some of the factors create great problems to the migratory birds. And advantages. Generally, birds prefer migration for some advantage, some better conditions, some favorable conditions. It creates survival value for the birds. By way of migration, the birds reach better climate provided with plenty of food, increased space for breeding and nestling, roosting, feeding. By the way of migration, birds may get longer daylight to gather food and also to feed the young ones. And the most physiology of migration is because all long distance migrants have to fly for several hundreds of miles without food or drink. Therefore, in them deposition of fat takes place just prior to migration. The fat has a physiological advantage over the glycogen, which is the usual storage product of animal tissues. That fat produces more energy per unit weight. It also produces more water to cope with the high rate of metabolism and breeding. This is all about bird migration. So you can write this for essay question for your semester and examinations. Thank you. Thanks a lot for listening this lesson. All the best. See you in next video. Please subscribe my channel and view all the videos. Encourage me. I will promise you I will improve my presentation and my preparation with your kind cooperation. Yours, Dr. Polinaidu, Lecturer in Zoology, GDC Men, Srikakulam.